Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Today on the show, we have Andrew Spector. He is a neurologist and he wrote the KevinMD article, Fairness in Medical Publishing, Reforming the Peer Review Process. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Sure. So I'll work backwards a little bit. Right now, I am a sleep medicine physician at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. And sleep medicine's been my passion for a long time. I figured that out in college, and I sort of spent my whole education working toward this position here. So went to med school planning to be a sleep doctor, went to residency planning to be a sleep doctor, and did my fellowship and took this job. Been here about 7.5 years, and still love it.
Wonderful. And we are speaking in the middle of January and in the midst of the worst wave of the pandemic. Now, from that standpoint, what are you seeing in your clinical practice?
Well, the biggest thing that happened in sleep medicine is that we rapidly switched to telehealth, which is something we in sleep medicine have been trying to do for a long time. And then finally, we're able to do it from a logistics standpoint with insurance companies and the regulations. So I've been doing a lot of telehealth now. The patients are definitely having more trouble sleeping. I hear a lot about the phrase we coined as sort of COVID insomnia and more trouble sleeping as related to the change in their routines, stress of the moment. And there's even some thought that having COVID can disrupt sleep. So I'm seeing the whole collection of those things. And then there's the other population that without having to get up to go to work is loving the idea of staying home and sleeping in, and they can sleep ad lib now, which actually helps their sleep. So that's the other side of it. It's not all bad for everybody with regard to sleep.
Now, for those patients who have trouble sleeping because of COVID or the anxiety surrounding COVID, what kind of advice or treatment options are you giving them?
Well, I like to give people some reassurance. When stress is the cause of your trouble sleeping, it usually passes. And the worst thing that you can do is start to worry too much about your sleep. And I reassure people that this will pass. And the more anxious you get about sleep itself, the worse you're going to sleep. And so I try to just reassure people that they won't die from sleep deprivation because of insomnia, that this will pass, and just try to prevent the anxiety about sleep from being its own perpetuating factor for the insomnia.
So let's get into your KevinMD article now, Fairness in Medical Publishing, Reforming the Peer Review Process. Now, for those who didn't read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Sure. So one of my jobs at Duke Neurology is that I serve as the vice chair for inclusion, diversity, and empowerment. And in that role, I talk a lot about ways of improving even things like burnout and the culture of the workplace, all part of my scope as in that vice chair role. And one of the things that I look at specifically is unfunded work. People who get more and more jobs piled on and no time to do it, no financing to do it. And that's big, even among my colleagues in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space. And I usually abbreviate that EDI. Those working EDI are sort of famous for doing this. It's a thankless job. They don't get a budget or a salary for doing it. And I started looking at other things in our workplace that are similar to that, where you're asked to do work and not given any time or compensation for it. And one of those things is peer reviews for journals. So a journal will email you, ask you out of the blue to review an article that they think you might be somewhat expert in, and you're asked to do it within the next 2 weeks. You do it, you submit it. A couple weeks later, they send it back to you. You do it all over again. And at the end of it, it's great from a science standpoint, sort of, but it really does nothing for the reviewer. And my concern is not so much that we shouldn't be helping advance the science, but realistically, the companies we're doing this for are billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar companies. And so we're actually supporting an industry on the backs of our own expertise for free. And that's where I start to get concerned. If this were entirely a nonprofit exercise, something that we're all doing together for the collective scientific good, no problem. But if you're going to be making billions of dollars in profit, well, then maybe the people doing the work ought to share in some of that.
Now, if this was any other industry, for instance, the law industry, and someone asked you for a consultation or for your time, you could bill by the hour. Now, how compelled are you to do these peer reviews if a journal reaches you out of the blue?
The legal industry or any other area of expertise does not do these things for free. So it's unclear why we've set up our industry to do that. And certainly peer review is not the only avenue where that's the case. But when I get these reviews, I have started asking and saying, well, is there any stipend for this?
Hmm.
And typically what happens is they'll say no. And I'll say, why not? And I won't ever hear from them again. So that's
Hmm.
usually the end of it. Now, there are exceptions. I have reviewed for journals where I know the editor in chief personally, and I feel like I'm doing a personal favor. I will still do it. But there has to be some sort of connection, some reason I'm doing it beyond a random email I get. That's no longer enough to get me to do it.
Now, is it part of your responsibility working for an academic medical center to do a certain number of peer reviews on an annual basis?
So I've heard that there are institutions where they might look to that. Duke is not one of them. It doesn't factor into my promotion criteria at all. If I didn't do that, I don't think it would hurt me in any way. I have not seen any expectation to do this. They certainly care about publications and they want me to be the author, but nobody's asking me how many peer reviews I've done for journals.
And would you say this is specific to neurology, or are you seeing this across the board among your various specialties in medicine? Do a lot of journals just reach out to physicians, academic physicians, and say, "Hey, do this peer review"?
Yeah, I'm not aware that it has anything to do with neurology in particular. I think this is broader than that.
So, what's the answer here, other than just saying no or asking for a stipend on a collective basis? No, what are some of the solutions to fix this?
Well, I think, like you said, the quickest answer is a stipend. That you're hiring us to do a job, and we could do it for a stipend. But there are broader interventions that could take place. So, for example, I start to wonder what exactly the journal is contributing. They're making billions of dollars. So, what is it? What role do they play? They're not generating the intellectual product here. So, what they're doing is they're coordinating the review process, and then they're distributing the article. But we really don't need that because places like PubMed and other preprint servers and non-for-profit servers can host these articles for free. And in terms of distribution, it doesn't really help anymore to be mailing journals.
Hmm.
If I need to research an article, I'm going to PubMed or Google Scholar or any number of other search engines, and I'm going to find it electronically. I'm not going to the library and pulling this paper copy. So all the paper copies are doing are taking up space, and the environmental impact of that has to be massive. So we really could switch this all to an electronic format. For example, what if we were to post in preprint servers and have reviewers go online,
Hmm.
offer their reviews? We could rank the articles. We could designate them as not peer reviewed until enough people have gone on to these servers and reviewed them, and then it can change the label to being reviewed at that point. It doesn't necessarily require a for-profit industry at all.
Walk us through the procedure of a peer review. How long does it take you, and exactly what do you do when you peer review an article?
So when you get the email to peer review, you accept the invitation and create yourself an account in their system, log in, download all the paperwork they've sent you, which could include supplemental files and graphs and charts. And really, if you're taking your job seriously, you're going to spend a couple hours doing this because you not only are reviewing for content, you could be reviewing for language. I've peer reviewed several that are difficult to read because they may not have been written by a native English speaker, which makes it harder to get through sometimes. I have tremendous respect for anyone who can publish in a language that they aren't native speakers of. That's tremendous, but it does slow down the process for the reviewer. After we make our comments, there are different forms that you'd fill out online, and different journals request different information from their reviewers, and some of them are more formatted than others. So the better ones will actually ask you specific questions to weigh in on, and that actually helps guide your review. Others are more open-ended and they just ask for your thoughts in a non-specific way, and you don't even know exactly what they're looking for from the review because they may not have told you. And all told, it's a several-hour process, and then you make a recommendation at the end of it, and the recommendation is usually either to just accept it as is, or recommend that it needs to be revised or rejected. So those are usually your choices at the end of a review.
And to be clear, this is just added work to what you already do, and your academic center doesn't give you dedicated or protected time to do this. Is that correct?
Correct. There's no chance that I would do this other than on a weekend on my own time. I mean, that's really the only block of time where I'd be able to get 2 to 3 hours on my own to sit down and do a good job of this. I mean, that's not to say I couldn't do a bad job of it faster, but if I'm going to take the job seriously, it's going to take several hours.
And why do you think so many physicians do this? And it certainly goes to the altruism that is inherent to a lot of doctors. But sometimes I think it goes too far. They just give away their worth for nothing, and that leads to a point where they're getting taken advantage of. And from your experience and from your colleagues, do you find a lot of physicians are starting to push back on this, or is this something that you think is just going to continue to go on?
I unfortunately don't see a lot of pushback. I think this is so ingrained in us that I think people aren't questioning the status quo quite enough. And that was the reason for the article, just to get people thinking, hey, wait a second, maybe medicine doesn't have to be unique in its degree of altruism. But you hit on it. Altruism, I think, is a big part of it. I don't think it's self-interest, which says a lot for the physician community that we're willing to do this. But I don't think that in an era of burnout as high as it is, that we should be adding on more and more. And money is related to burnout. In fact, we actually, my colleagues and I wrote a piece for your site, Kevin, a couple of years ago on this very subject, that money isn't going to fix burnout, but adding on unfunded mandates like that can contribute to burnout. And at least showing the respect that we value your time can help mitigate some of that impact.
We're talking to Andrew Spector. He is a neurologist, and he wrote the KevinMD article, Fairness in Medical Publishing, Reforming the Peer Review Process. So Andrew, what's the response to your article, or whenever you talk to other physicians about this and maybe you suggest, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this? What's the response from your colleagues, from your friends, and from this article?
Well, so far, I think there's a pretty good agreement in terms of the existence of a problem. The response I'm getting is more of a debate as to what to do about it and how to handle the response. And I am very open to different solutions, okay? I proposed one in the article, but that's not the only one that we could think of. So I think people tend to be in agreement, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be free labor for these billion-dollar industries anymore. But what to do about it tends to be where we start to get into interesting discussions. And I love hearing their ideas.
So if a physician is listening to this podcast and they receive an unsolicited request to do a peer review, what's your advice for them?
Well, if they're not particularly interested and really desperate to do it, they can either say no or do what I've started doing, which is just asking for stipend. Maybe if they start getting enough requests, they'll realize that this is something that they're going to have to start doing and putting this on the radar of the publishing houses, that their era of free labor is coming to an end.
And my final question, Andrew, what's your take-home message you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
So my take-home message is specifically that you as a clinician are a highly trained professional, and no other industry would expect you to work for free. So you deserve this. You do not have to be altruistic all the time. This is your profession, and we can't keep giving away our expertise for free.
Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Kevin.